Members of the Oakley Country Club held a tribute ceremony in honor of famed golf course designer Donald James Ross for his 150th birthday on November 23, 2022. Ross's first job, once coming to America from Scotland in 1899, was an employee at Oakley Country Club in Watertown. Here is a brief history of Ross's life and career.
My name is Daniel Mee, and I am the club historian at Oakley. And as President Griffin said, we're delighted to come here and pay a small tribute to a man who has done so much for the sport of golf. We're writing a history of the Oakley Country Club, and you can't write that without a big chunk of it discussing Mr. Ross. And so we thought it appropriate today to pull some excerpts from that work, and it'll run about 10 minutes, so if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you a little bit about Mr. Ross, much of which many of you know, but much of it else is some things that haven't been published. So Donald James Ross was born on November 23rd, 1872 at Dornoch, Scotland, which is situated in the Northern Highlands. Ross began to caddy at the Dornoch Golf Club when he was 10 years old. John Sutherland, the Dornoch Club secretary, which is similar to a GM, he liked Don Ross, and he gave him a few used clubs. Donald Ross quickly became one of the best golfers in the region, and he apprenticed in carpentry during this period. Later, Ross decided golf would be his life's career, and the decision did not sit well with his parents, who wished him to stay in carpentry. Sutherland was effective and persuaded Donald Ross's parents to send him to St. Andrews in Carnoustie to learn the golf business. And it was with Sutherland's, only with Sutherland's promise of a job back in Dornoch that his parents finally gave their blessing. At St. Andrews, Ross was taught under old Tom Morris, and while at Carnoustie he was tutored under Robert Simpson, two giants in the early days of golf. In 1893, after a year at St. Andrews and another year at Carnoustie, Ross returned home to serve as the first golf professional at Dornoch. And you dial forward to 1898, Donald Ross was by all accounts a very happy man. He was close to his family, he was active in his church, he had a great job in his hometown, which his mentor had effectively created for him. And furthermore, Donald Ross had a girlfriend, the love of his life, Janet Conchi, whom he intended to wed. But on August 23 of 1898, the future of Donald Ross changed forever when, while giving a lesson to Harvard University professor Robert Wilson, and Wilson hailed from Scottish ancestry and spent several vacations in the Highlands. And Ross met Wilson, and during this lesson, Wilson was beyond impressed with his young instructor. Wilson was a founding member of the Oakley Country Club, and he was on the incoming member of the Oakley Grounds Committee. Wilson was aware that his rapidly growing golf club in Watertown required someone to provide lessons, and the fact that Ross could also make clubs was an added bonus. Professor Wilson discussed career options with Ross, and Wilson suggested a position at Oakley. Wilson emphasized the economics of working in America would be a vast improvement on anything he could hope to earn in Scotland. As Ross contemplated a move to America, Wilson returned home and convinced the Oakley leadership that Ross would be an excellent choice for a golf instructor for the surging golf program. Golf chairman Alfred Ripley sent offer employment as clubmaker and golf instructor with compensation of $60 a month and 50 cents per golf lesson. Ross later acknowledged that that was 3 times what he was making in Dornoch, and he set plans for America. In March 1899, Ross migrated to the United States to accept a position at Oakley. It is interesting that in his the manifest of the ship that brought him to America, his occupation was simply listed as the humble club maker. When Ross arrived at Oakley, he encountered a new 18-hole golf links which had been laid out the previous year by Willie Campbell. The Campbell links was shot, no frills. It had mostly straight holes, which were carefully laid out on a diminutive 71 acres. Ross was hired, and he took to his club making and golf instructions, but He also quickly was added different roles. In that first season at Oakley, Ross played competitive golf. He taught golf lessons. He built and repaired golf clubs. He recruited and trained caddies. He maintained the golf course and implemented several design changes to the links. The Oakley leadership certainly took note of this talented young man with the impressive work ethic. People need to understand that Ross was more than just a teacher and a club maker. He was an elite golfer. He really was. He won 2 Mass Opens. He won the 3 North-South Opens. He competed in 7 U.S. Opens, and he finished in the top 10 4 times, and he finished 8th in the 1910 Open Championship. Ross's skills as a club maker were second to none. Wanamaker's of Philadelphia sold his clubs in the store. Later in his career, both the Bristol Golf Equipment Company and the McGregor Golf Company produced golf clubs designed by Donald Ross. But of course, it was golf course architecture that he had his heart set. And in 1899, Oakley had acquired additional acreage, and the board was interested in stretching out the tight Campbell course. At this point, Willie Campbell was very ill. He was unable to work on the golf course improvement, and sadly, Willie died in 1900. Donald Ross, at that point, had thoroughly impressed Oakley leadership during his first year and was asked to redesign the Oakley course, and this was his first attempt at golf course architecture. By the late fall 1900, Ross's work at Oakley was complete, and the project was praised by club members and the Boston golf community. Oakley rewarded Ross with a generous compensation, and he sent $2,000 home to his mother in Dornoch. She was so delighted that she used the money to put a second story on the family home and renamed the home the Oakley Cottage. After taking indoor lessons from Donald Ross in 1900, Oakley member and attorney Samuel Smith was impressed with his instructor's teaching skills. Smith's client was Mr. Tufts, who had just designed the Pinehurst course in North Carolina. Samuel set up the meeting with Tufts, and the rest is history. Donald Ross started work as the winter pro in Pinehurst in November 1900. So from 1899 to 1910, Donald Ross was the summer professional at Oakley, and he served as the winter professional at Pinehurst. The Oakley golf season was approximately April through July, and then again September through November. This freed up Ross during the summer to work on his newly won golf design business. The personal life of Donald Ross. He was raised in a home that was fueled with strong Presbyterian faith of his parents, and he grew to be an even-tempered, loyal Scotsman with a Christian code of values. As Donald rose to fame and fortune, these collided with personal tragedy, but his faith sustained him. In 1904, Donald Ross married Janet Conchie. They settled at 31 Bartlett Ave in Belmont, Massachusetts, just a few blocks from the Oakley Country Club. And on October 18, 1909, their only daughter, Lillian Grace Wilson Ross, was born. After the 1910 golf season, Donald Ross left Oakley and moved to Essex. His family moved with him, and they resided in a small home adjacent to the Essex Links. Oakley, Pinehurst, and Essex are the only U.S. golf clubs where Mr. Ross served as a full-time employee. After 3 years at Essex, Ross left, and then he did some work in Western Mass, where the family moved for the summer of 1914. Following that, the Ross family moved to Newton, and ultimately they settled at 1032 Beacon Street in Newton Center. Donald and Janet had a good marriage. Donald, Janet, and Lillian were a happy family. Unfortunately, in 1919, Janet developed cancer. It took her life in February of 1922. Now, Donald Ross was not single long. He soon courted longtime family friend Susan Aldrich, whom Lillian adored. And in April 1923, they were engaged to marry. And this engagement made Lillian very happy. but their good fortune was short-lived. Soon after their engagement, Susan Aldrich also contracted cancer, and she passed away in August 1923. This second loss was very hard on Donald and Lillian. Donald threw himself into his work, and between 1922 and 1924, Donald Ross and Associates built or rebuilt 75 golf courses. This remarkable volume of work took a toll on Donald's health, and he required an extended period of bed rest. In late 1924, Donald Ross met and married Florence Sturdy Blackington. It has been suggested that Donald married the wealthy widow to provide support for Lillian while he feared for his own mortality given his recent affliction. After the marriage to Florence, Donald sold the Newton home, and Donald, Florence, and Lillian spent their time in New England in Compton, Rhode Island, where Florence had a summer home. When the Great Depression hit, demand for private golf course architecture services decreased, and Ross entered a new phase of his life. He was less busy, and Donald and Florence developed a comfortable, relaxed lifestyle in North Carolina and Rhode Island. Ross went on to design some 400 golf courses. Massachusetts has the most surviving Ross-designed courses with 44, followed closely with North Carolina with 41. A short list of Ross's best-known courses includes Seminole at Juno Beach in Florida, Oakland Hills in Michigan, Oak Hill in Rochester, Inverness in Ohio, East Lake in Atlanta, the Biltmore in Florida, and the Broadmoor in Colorado. Now, Donald Ross is best known for his design work, but he's also acclaimed for many golf innovations, and many of those happened at Oakley. Ross was from a traditional background, but he always had a keen eye for new technology that would make his work more efficient. In 1900, he convinced the Oakley board to acquire a steam shovel with a steam roller to assist in the redevelopment plans of his first course. Donald Ross was also one of the first greenkeepers in America to use irrigation. At Oakley in 1900, when more than a few rural homes still didn't have indoor plumbing, Ross ran water pipes to all the greens and tees. Tee innovation. Ross implemented multiple and adjustable teeing grounds to allow golf course to be adjusted for weather and turf conditions. He also used offset tees, which were not aligned with the playing corridor, to create more angles of play and add interest to the game. Think Oakley's Hole 3. Indoor golf lessons. During the only winter he spent in the Northeast, 1899-1900, Ross built indoor hitting bays in the Oakley squash courts. This was a very early example of indoor golf. And this is a recent discovery that Dr. Healy and I came across. The practice ranges were very uncommon in the late 19th, early 20th century. The mantra in this era was, you learn golf by playing golf. But in 1907, Ross discontinued the old second hole next to the first hole, and the holes were rerouted. Ross repurposed this corridor of the old second hole to be a practice range. Now, in 1913, 7 years later, Ross built the famous Maniac Hill at Pinehurst, which is a practice range. And that at the time was said to be one of the first in the country. We can only conclude that the Oakley range may in fact be the first in the country. Now, there have been volumes written on the magnificent career of Mr. Ross, the most recent of which is Golf Course Architecture of Donald Ross. This is a 352-page work by my friend, Brad Becken, who's also president of the Donald Ross Society. Becken has played all 365 Donald Ross courses known to still exist. His book details his experiences, and it's a good read. I highly recommend it. Donald James Ross died in Pinehurst on April 22, 1948. He was laid to rest here in Newton, Massachusetts, beside his first wife, Janet. Later, his beloved daughter Lillian and her husband Richard were also interred on these grounds.